Welcome to a football show Monday edition, week number 2 in the Titans training camp as we get ready for football season. My name is Braden Gall, and that is Zach Lyons, and we, of course, are brought to you by Sinkers Beverages and the Kingston Group. Zach, good to see you, sir. How are you?
Doing good. A lot of updates to get to, a lot of news, a lot of insight provided by the Tennessee Titans, and of course, they had their stadium practice, which yielded really nothing, but it was very interesting, I guess, for the fans that win.
Malik Willis was electric. He was electric.
Yeah. Oh man, those one-on-one passes that he was able to get without pressure, man, electric. I saw some of the highlights today. Good for him.
And thus concludes
only took his third season to finally have a good practice.
And thus concludes our Malik Willis analysis for the day. All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a couple of conversations here that I think are interesting. And I know this is not a new topic, Zach, where every time a couple of quarterbacks sign contracts, we have a conversation. The conversation around Will Levis, can he be a player of a certain caliber? You know, you have sort of your 20-60-20 theory. Brian Callahan has said some things recently before, training camp opened about what he thinks like the elite of the elite quarterbacks are capable of doing from a system standpoint. So all of this is sort of, can we learn about Will Levis? When does the contract conversation begin with Will Levis relative to Jordan Love and Tua getting extensions? Who and where and how good do you have to be to win a Super Bowl? They all kind of fall into like a singular conversation that for me is like now evolved from like, is Joe Flacco elite to when should the Titans pay Will Levis? Like that's where my mind has gone through this long journey. So we'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. And of course, I think and this is your topic, and I'm fascinated by this. Sort of this year and this Titans team and this coaching staff and this roster being a really good test for how much coaching can matter for an individual player or unit or team. And so get into a really smart conversation about that to start. But I know you've got some other stuff, some video clips that you want the good folks to see today. We're going to do that in the middle of the show. But if you want to tell everybody sort of what you've got ready for them and what they're going to see, please, by all means.
Yeah, well, we got news from Bill Callahan about NPF and about the competition, his availability, the competition at right tackle, what he's, it's not NPF's job right now. It's not his job to lose. It's his job to win, according to Bill Callahan. So he gets into that and talks about the pads coming on, which is a good conversation, which I wish I had to put a feeler out for JT to ask this question. How much can you realistically expect the tide to turn in favor of the offense when the pads come on? Bill Callahan's been around a while, and this is a new thing where everybody's like, well, we'll wait to see when the pads come on. And last year, we said the same thing about Andre Dillard and that offensive line, and the pads came on, and it did not get better. So, the offensive line is struggling, which it should. That is a realistic expectation. This offensive line should struggle as it continues to learn a new system. But that was very interesting. We got Tracy Rocker, 2 different clips on T'Vondre Sweat. We have Justin Otten talking about where the tight ends are and how kind of giving a little bit of insight about how they'll be used. And, of course, Jaquan Jackson's usage and improvements so far, which kind of has sparked a little bit of debate behind the scenes on what the F spot is. So a little bit of interesting discussions today. Yeah. It's not just your same old coverage.
Yes, Will Levis was 11 for 17, and Trey Avery's the first one to ever intercept Will Levis in camp. More of that for the next hour. No, we try to do stuff a little differently here. That's sort of the point and the goal. So we'll talk about the quarterback market and Will Levis. What does it mean for the Titans and for how we sort of plan for this team? And really, what does it mean from a Super Bowl championship competitive standpoint? We've got lots of videos. All the coaches were available, of course, today. There will be very early practices the next 2 days, I believe, on Tuesday and Wednesday, like 8:30 in the morning. So Thursday show, we'll have some really good reaction to what took place in those padded practices coming up this week. And then, of course, this coaching conversation. First, however, Sinkers Beverages, our great and amazing, awesome, wonderful partner and sponsor. They make this show free for you each and every Monday and Thursday. So make sure you go support them and their sister store, Bluegrass Beverages, up in Hendersonville. They have a massive selection. By the way, they are so good and so constantly progressing and evolving, like a Bill Callahan coached offensive line prospect. That they even saw that their parking lot wasn't doing good work. for their customers, and they spent a bunch of money to redo the entire parking lot so that you could get in and out a little bit easier. So they're constantly thinking of your experience at Sinkers Beverages. Great selection of every product you could ever need, and you can search Uber Eats Sinkers Beverages. Just search Sinkers Beverages, and they will deliver the booze, Zach, directly to your house.
Hey, they drive so you can drink.
Sign up for the in-crowd, follow them on the socials, and, of course, support Bluegrass Beverages up in Hendersonville, proud sponsor of the Football and Other F Words podcast right here from 440 Sports. Kingston Group, buildkg.com is the name you need to know and the website you need to know in the URL. If you're making any big decisions about your house, make sure you remember the name, the Kingston Group. That's all we ask of you guys. Just remember the name. Not a big deal. Same thing we've been telling you for years. Okay, so I want you to set up the topic here in general because this was your idea, and I think this could blossom into a lot of different directions and a lot of different ideas. But I want you to set it up about why the 2024 Titans, in your mind, could be a fantastic case study and test on how much coaching matters to players, position groups, and eventually the team.
So it's something that was kind of been lurking around because there's been, and it really, I guess, really starts with the whole Craig Ackerman discourse that we've had on the show, that other people have had on their shows, and like, how much can a special teams coach actually coach? And, I laid out all the facts about the special teams coach being terrible. And you're like, well, could be on the players. I mean, I remember us being at the pharmacy and spending a lot of time talking about this. I'm like, well, this seems like it's a coaching issue because there's one constant across all these kickers. Right. And then Mike Vrabel goes on, pardon my take, PMT last week, I believe, maybe 2 weeks ago now. And he talks about the kicker situation. He goes, I see all these guys that come here before they get here, they're good. We sign them. They come here, they suck. And then they leave and they go somewhere else and they're really good. And I think he used Greg Joseph as an example and all this stuff. And I'm like, he goes, I don't understand why. I said, well, I'm thinking there's one constant. It's the same constant I've screamed over and over on various shows, Craig Ackerman. Like, that is coaching. And so that kind of sparked put that back in my head, how much coaching matters and how sometimes I think people overstate the importance of the head coach and understate the importance of the coordinators and position coaches. And then we're seeing development and freshness from Treylon Burks. Tavondre Sweat is another key guy. How the returners do are some positions. So it just got this question lurking in my head. We talked a lot about Vrabel coaching up players to thrive in certain moments, but there was never consistency. Like, he was able to get Greg Maben to play one really good game in Kansas City, and then Greg Maben, sucked the rest of the way. But we downplayed, and I say we as the royal we, the fans, the media, right, everything. We downplayed the importance of Ackerman and other position coaches. I think Jason Hoteling really opened up a lot of eyes, but there's a lot of downplaying of what Craig Ackerman actually is, what Shane Bowen actually was, what Tim Kelly was. Like, there was a lot of
Coach Carter,
of their importance. Yeah,
Keith Carter.
Keith Carter. This year, though, if players like Burks, Kenneth Murray, who has seen a lot of high praise after being much maligned over in Los Angeles Chargers, and others start hitting the stride, it kind of shows the importance of coaching just beyond your elite positional coaches. Like Bill Callahan, obviously a force multiplier. The Dante Skornecki from the Patriots is one of those offensive line coaches, but I'm also trying to think of the guy from Philadelphia, and his name is just totally erased from my head. But besides your elite position coaches, like Tyke Tolbert, how much can he impact Treylon Burks? And it's looking like pretty well. I mean, Burks is taking to this coaching system, and I think it talks about Jeff Stoutland. I think it talks about the importance of coaching in the NFL. And I think that sometimes it gets downplayed about the importance of your positional coaches. Maybe not as much as your coordinators, but I do think positional coaches matter a lot more than what we here, at least, think.
So I think your theory and your premise is absolutely spot on. I don't think that after 3 unpadded practices that we can definitively say anything. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I do think there are some perfect names that you've already mentioned. And again, Treylon Burks and Kenneth Murray are 2 really, really good ones, guys that have high pedigree, lots of talent, lots of athleticism. haven't necessarily been coached up particularly well in the beginnings of their career. I think you could put, I think MPF might qualify. He's got some other things he's got to work through, but a very talented guy with a lot of pedigree, getting good coaching from Bill Callahan at the offensive line position. I think you could put him in there. So a couple of quick things. I think I totally agree with your premise, and I am fascinated to watch it take place.
That's the thing. It's a good test sample, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what it is.
And that's your point, and that's your theory. So I think it's a really good one. I think it's a smart one, despite Stoney being too hungover for this. But I don't think I think you need games, and I think we're not there yet, which I think goes without saying. But I was talking to somebody this weekend that's been around the Baltimore program for a really, really long franchise for a really, really long time. And one of the things I asked, we were kind of talking about Derrick Henry and like, how does the Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry combo work in the backfield? All the obvious stuff we talked about. But I said, like, how concerned should I be about the defense? Like, this Ravens defense has been its calling card for a very, very long time, multiple generations of John Harbaugh coaching staffs, and even going back before that. And I said, the brain drain on this side of the ball from a coaching perspective, like, sure, you're losing Geno Stone and Patrick Queen. Those are two nice players that they're losing. But I was like, how are we undervaluing the loss of 3 defensive coordinators? 3 people left that Baltimore coaching staff to go be, one went to be a head coach in McDonald, and 2, Denard Wilson, and the name escapes me.
Anthony Weaver.
Anthony Weaver,
right?
Yeah, both went to be coordinators. So you lost essentially three defensive coordinators off the top of your defensive coaching pyramid on that side of the ball. And this person said to me, he goes, unequivocally, that the Ravens cannot win. It won't be because of Lamar. It won't be because of Derrick Henry or the offensive line or Todd Monken or anything else they're doing. The receivers not being good enough.
The offensive line is a little shaky.
Sure, but he goes, but this team, if this team does not repeat what it did last year, it's because of the brain drain on the coaching staff for the Baltimore Ravens on defense. And that's sort of like then you texted me and I was like, this is you're right. It is a perfect, because the quality of the coaching staff behind Brian Callahan, it does feel like they've taken a major step forward. That's what we think, at least. And to hear somebody from a franchise that is so stable and so good on the coaching and the development side of things say that that's their biggest concern, it sort of crystallized your entire argument for me, just having that conversation on Sunday.
Yeah, it's just it was something that's I hear Joe Rexrode when he argues the importance of Craig Ackerman. Like, I'm just always taken back by how many people are willing to give a coach a pass, and especially when they're the common denominator, right? Like that to me is where I get to a point. It's like, okay, Greg Joseph came in here, he sucked, they didn't stick with him, and then he goes and he's getting contracts somewhere else. We've had these guys come in and rotate in, and I get it that maybe we're not looking for prime Adam Vinatieri, but we were just looking for guys that could do their job.
Right.
And then, last year they really spent and went and traded for, and got Nick Folk. And Nick Folk was able, and yes, Craig Ackerman was here for most of that year, but Nick Folk is a guy that is at the age where you don't have to coach him, right? There is no coaching, but we still saw, and the same thing for Brett Kern and Ryan Stonehouse. Ryan Stonehouse needed coaching, and he's shown some improvement, but for the most part, those guys are probably, from what it sounds like from Craig Ackerman's own mouth, left to their own devices. And it's like he never really had an answer on how to improve the return game. And then you saw him, have these blunders that lead to Ryan Stonehouse getting injured. But I look at it and I go, if we can't sit here and say that coaches are bad, but they're not the reason why the players are bad. And I think that's where I get to a certain point. It's like,
it's hard to,
they can be the reason.
And two things can be true, right? It could be both. Right. I mean, like,
they could be both. And that's what I'm saying is, like, I do think that when we talk about the importance of position coaches, like, everybody's like, Bill Callahan, he can do this and he can do that. And obviously there's a cap to what he can and can't do with a player. Sure. But everybody's so excited. So why can't everybody be excited about, well, we went from in our tight end room, we got one of the better tight end coaches who got his job as an offensive coordinator because he was a tight end coach, not coaching the running backs. And instead of the running back coach they had coaching last year,
Right.
and I get to this point, it's like, for me, Chris Harris, right, I think is a good example. Now, he's getting a lot of guys. Like, I mean, he's getting top tier talent. So maybe that's not a great.
Well, no,
example.
okay, no. Let's stay with Harris. Here's an example. Two guys. So I wanted to ask you a bunch of names here, a bunch of guys, and see if you sort of like let's make a list of guys that we should study on this topic throughout the course of the year. And I'm going to stick with Chris Harris here for a second because I think that I've got 3 names written down that I think are interesting in this conversation. I don't think it's I like, sure, could Chris Harris make L'Jarius Sneed a little bit better? Sure. But is L'Jarius Sneed's success mostly at this point in his career need to be credited to L'Jarius Sneed? Probably. Is Denard Wilson?
Dave Merritt. Can I just say Dave Merritt is a damn good defensive backs coach?
Absolutely. And if Denard Wilson is also a part of this, right, he's going to put people in a position to be successful. But like, here's a couple of names. And I'm going to kind of work my way up here or down, I should say. Roger McCreary is a guy who was a high enough draft pick to have some pedigree and some talent. We know that he's pretty good. But if he turns into a really high-level slot corner, that to me is Chris Harris and Denard Wilson making him maximizing his potential and an example of coaching mattering. I think Elijah Molden is another one of those guys. I think Hooker kind of already is what he is, but I think Molden has a chance changing positions to learn and grow and develop a lot, and that's another player. Here's the one that I think is really interesting because I don't know if he's going to make the team. If Caleb Farley, if Chris Farley could play defense.
Chris Farley rises from the dead.
He's got really great hips,
He's probably better than Quentin Bohanna.
So if Caleb Farley even sniffs the roster, if Caleb Farley makes the team, even comes close to making the team, I think you have to say, he's healthy and put in the work. So that's number one. But if Caleb Farley even comes close to making the team, you have to credit development with Harris and Wilson for a player like that. First round pick, pedigree, lots of athletic talent, hasn't really figured it out. And so to me, I think that's the kind of player, again, the bar is different for each one, right? McCreary, I want him to be like an upper half slot corner in the NFL. Molden, I want him to be an upper half safety starting in the NFL. Farley, it's like just make the team. And it's almost a case study for Harris and Wilson doing good work.
You could also look at guys like in that same position room. Gabe Jeudy-Lally would be a guy that you could if he makes it in, even if Farley doesn't make it in, but Gabe Jeudy-Lally makes it in, that's kind of where you're talking about, what Chris Harris has been able to do, the identifying of talent, the being able to coach him up, undrafted free agent. Same thing with Trey Avery. If he still makes the team, a lot of people have written off Trey Avery, and
he's having a good camp so far, I think.
Yeah, I personally have not, but there are people out there that have written off Trey Avery. I will say this about Chris Harris. So his energy is now matched by Denard Wilson, right? Nobody matched his energy on that defense last year. Now, that did not translate to anything on the field because you saw the team and those players make the same mistakes over and over. Oftentimes, sometimes it's scheme related, sometimes it is, talent related. So if maybe those in this scheme, those mistakes don't show up, then maybe a little bit of Chris Harris. But I do agree that Roger McCreary, Chris Harris, and Denard Wilson are kind of all three tied together. Even though Roger McCreary he took a big leap last year. Yeah. And that's when Chris Harris was there.
I think there's more. I think it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask for more from Roger McCreary. I think that's okay.
Right, and I agree. But also, I want to just point out that his best year so far has been under Chris Harris.
Yeah,
and he was doing things that Chris Harris has normally seen his cornerback group thrive doing, and that's being press coverage, being physical. And Christian Fulton and Sean Murphy Bunting really weren't those guys because they were allowed to line up so far away. So it's almost like this Chris Harris Denard Wilson thing is a perfect marriage because now Chris Harris can actually coach players to his strength in a style and system that fits what Chris Harris wants his corners to be and do. So I would agree, like, there's very limited. See, that's the key point of this whole issue when you're talking about this issue is that we also understand that players are the bulk of what really matters, the talent of your players. But when you're not given supreme talent, what can you do with it? And that's what Mike Vrabel was able to do.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it consistently, and he didn't do it towards the end of the year, or towards the end of his tenure there. Now, listen, this roster does have players that aren't very good, but they have players that do overlap with the Mike Vrabel regime. And if those players take a big step forward, and they never really did that in 2 or 3 years, then
Yeah.
that's a good sign that coaching matters.
Honestly, it's not a difficult sort of framework to put around a player. Like, are you extremely athletic, have a lot of talent and upside, and haven't necessarily maximized it yet, versus the guy who was sort of a bottom of the roster player who just busted his ass and got onto the team. Like, there's varying degrees of success, but the poster children, for lack of a better term, are the Roger McCray, and for Bill Callahan, it's very obviously it's NPF and Dylan Radins. Like, he absolutely matters to Peter Skoronski and JC Latham. Those are two extremely talented pedigree players, but like they're sort of already in the lineup and they need to be developed. It's to me, it's about like Dylan Radins accomplishes largely nothing. NPF accomplishes largely nothing. All of a sudden turn into dependable pieces. Whether it's a backup or a starter is not the point. The point is they became the thing they were supposed to become because Bill Callahan got his hands on them. I'll put one out there, and I know we joked about Malik Willis, but if you are going to go down this path with Brian Callahan as a offensive, play calling developer with holes and the rest of the offensive staff, if all of a sudden Malik Willis is doing the things that for the first time in his career, like, we can joke, hey, it took him 3 years, way to go.
Yeah.
But the arm talent was never the problem. The athleticism was never the problem. It was sort of putting the package all together and being coached to execute properly. And some of that's on him. Some of that's on the other coaching staff. So if Malik Willis actually does look like the best version of himself, I don't think it's crazy to be like, well, why wouldn't Brian Callahan and Nick Coles and these other guys get some credit for that? Tyke Tolbert doesn't get credit for Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyler Boyd, but he absolutely would get credit for Traylon Burks and Kyle Phillips. So it's a very simple, not simple is not the right word. To me, it's very obvious names on the roster. There's about 6 or 7 or 8 of them that you're like, this is the case study right here.
They're all mainly from the same draft class.
Yeah,
I mean, really what you're looking at is you're not looking for what can they get out of Mike Brown. You're looking for what can they get out of Chig. Chig is a good example because he had a good rookie year when he had a dedicated tight end coach that is actually experienced coaching tight ends, or at least was an assistant coach who moved up through the ranks that way. Last year, his play drops off, and what do they have? Like, what did they do when you look at questioning yourself? Why did Chig drop off? What's the better answer, or the most obvious answer, the Occam's razor answer? Is it that Chig suddenly forgot how to play football, or is it that they put a running back coach as his tight end coach?
I would say B, Your Honor.
Yeah, that's the most obvious answer, I feel like. And so now he's got Justin Otten, who we'll talk about later, but Justin Otten is a guy that, and I've talked about this on stackintheinbox.com before, is like, he is a guy that was known to be a great tight ends coach, and not an elite one or anything, but he was pretty great with what he had in Green Bay. Like, he had guys like Richard Rodgers, in Green Bay.
Yeah, it was
Robert Tonyan. Like, not guys that are household names or anything.
To
but he made Robert Tonyan fantasy relevant.
To your point, sometimes we've never seen any of these people in the same place at the same time, and they might all be the same human. We're not sure.
They may be all the same guy.
By the way, Andrew, sorry to interrupt. Andrew says, is Willis younger than Levis? Willis is 1 month older. Willis turned 25 in May, and Levis
thought they were the same age.
Levis turned 25 in June, so they are almost identical in age. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, young. He's. Yeah, I would say yeah. Go ahead. I was going to say something, but it didn't really matter. But like, I think that you should expect things from Josh Wiley and Chig Okonkwo, not tied in one number separately, but tied in one numbers together because of how this offense is made up. But you should see improvement. You should see jumps from both Josh Wiley and Chig Okonkwo, not only because of Justin Otten, but because they're putting in the work. Same thing with Malik Willis, everything that we can say about Malik Willis, it's never been able to be put together, but it's not for a lack of trying during the offseason. And Chig and Josh Wiley have been present a lot, and they were both at Cabo, but present a lot, working out with Will Levis, and that's going to pay dividends. But also the coaching is going to matter so much. And I'm sure that things are so much clearer for them than having a running back coach be a first-year tight end coach in Wiley's rookie year and Levis's second year as a player.
And honestly, we can joke about Malik Willis and the impact of the coaching staff, but truly there is no better and bigger and more glaring example of this than Will Levis's talent and teaching him accuracy and processing. Like there's no like he is the one that has the transformer skills and upside and needs the other stuff to help him maximize his talent. And by the way, Calvin Ridley, why is Calvin Ridley of all players complaining about the cost of Cabo? Like that one's a little funny to me. The guy who just got the massive paycheck and the massive contract, he said, Cabo's too expensive. I guess, Will Levis, he is in fact a bachelor in paradise. There's no question about that. All right. So I think this is a great group of players to study. And I think what we should do is put the official list together, maybe throw them in the show notes sometime or throw them out on Twitter. I think there could be like an 8 to 10 list of players that we say, all right, let's track these guys. They have lots of talent. They have lots of upside. They were not maximized or developed earlier. Let's see what this staff does with them. And by the end of the year, we can look at that team. And there's a lot of names on there, Zach, that we've sort of called like the house money guys, right? Like that if they get something from them, it's sort of house money. There's also plenty of contributors and plenty of guys that they actually need to develop and perform. So, again, I think there's about 8 or 9 or 10 of them that we could kind of put on this list and say, all right, this will be a great case study into how good that coaching staff was and how good they did under this regime versus how well they did with Vrabel under the previous regime. And it doesn't mean that every coach for Vrabel was bad. There's a couple of good ones, but we know Callahan, for example, is better than anything that the Titans had at offensive line coach. Like that just goes without saying. All right. How about you set these up? Let's go one at a time here. Why don't you set up what we're going to see and what we're going to hear, and then we'll kind of react to each of these clips from, I believe this is from today, correct? Coaching availability from the Titans coaching staff today, correct?
Yes. So the position coaches were available. Now they didn't, the media was not, the practice was not open to media, but after practice interviews with the position coaches were open. Where do you want to start with NPF first?
Let's start with NPF first. Yep. That's a good one.
Okay. So give me 1 second.
So this is Bill Callahan, I believe, on
yeah, so NPF. This is Bill Callahan talking about NPF, about where he's at in the right tackle battle, where he's at in the classroom, where he's at with his rehab. And this is courtesy of Paul Karski, at Paul Karski NFL.
Yeah, I was hoping he would be back. I think we're going to push his rehab back a little bit to Friday. Hopefully we can get him back and then accelerate from there. Back in Cleveland, I had a number of tackles that, started the year on PUP. So it's that situation where it's a fine line. He's getting all the classroom walkthrough type work, but he needs to get on the field and practice, which he'll get to. I'm not concerned about that. More importantly, it's getting him back into a groove where he can communicate and get into his pass sets and get that timing down.
Do you consider him at the head of the line at right tackle?
I don't know. In all honesty and fairness to everybody, I've reserved all my comments on the evaluation process until we've seen him in pads, seen him, obviously in a preseason game, and interact with them on the bench and see them make adjustments and see how they handle, the pressure of game day. That being said, I thought Saturday's practice in the stadium was really good for that atmosphere. It was very game-like for the players. They got a sense of, the crowd communicating in noise, being on their own away from, not having coaches behind them. So that was real beneficial.
There you have it. According to at Paul Karski NFL, that's Bill Callahan. A couple of interesting notes there. First of all, 10,000 fans in the stands isn't exactly mirroring the atmosphere, unless you want to make a really bad Nissan Stadium joke.
Well, at least they were all down near the field. You know what I'm saying?
True.
At least they were there. But
and
that
that's
is
better
how
than
many Tennessee fans show up to a game.
I see. I'd set you up for that. All right, I've got a couple of reactions, but you go ahead. Your first reaction there from NPF getting pushed back, I guess, till Friday. He's not going to practice the next couple of days, and the rotation there.
Well, my first reaction is that my feelings towards NPF having a firm spot on the right tackle spot, and I never thought he did. Once he started missing practices, I never thought he did, because there's only so much you can learn in the classroom. And it's all about, you got to take what you got in the classroom and put it out in the practice. And he hasn't done that yet. Now he keeps on missing these valuable reps. And this is a guy who has missed lots of valuable reps last year. And so there's not a lot of practice being had, physical practice, because you'll hear Tracy Rocker talk about it when he talks about Tavondre Sweat, is that you can be in shape all year long and go to these, gyms and do all this stuff. But there's a difference when there's another guy on you who got his hands on you and pushing you around. That requires a different kind of shape. That's football shape.
You can't simulate that. You can't
simulate that in the classroom, and you can't simulate that in really your training practices and all this stuff without pads on. And, even O-line masterminds, they don't use pads. So, there's only so much you can do. And NPF has missed now a good chunk of last year's offseason, so far this year's offseason, and is falling behind. So I'm not surprised that the sentiment kind of went like, well, NPF, he'll be at the top of the depth chart. We can't wait to get NPF back to, well, we kind of got to see it. And that's how it's transitioned. Yeah. And that says a lot about what they've seen behind the scenes about NPF and what they've seen in front of their faces from John Ojukwu and Jalen Duncan, who today finally got snaps at right tackle. And then also, who's the other guy that I'm leaving out? Leroy Watson would be the other guy.
They have not had, and this is, I think, one of the stories about this conversation, which is they have not been rotating. Not since OTAs, not since minicamp, not in the first week and a half of practice, not on Saturday. It has been Sadiq Charles and John Ojukwu as the starting lineman on the right side. This whole hey, we've got 8 players for 2 spots kind of thing hasn't really played itself out in practice, although maybe it's just starting that way because NPF's not available. But I think you're absolutely correct. It doesn't mean that NPF doesn't eventually take the job back or isn't game ready by week 2, 3, or 4. But there is absolutely a timeline here where if you're just not on the field, you're falling behind. And so I still think that NPF is the most talented piece. And back to our first conversation about this, if Bill Callahan works miracles and maximizes all of these pieces, the guy who will max out at the best is NPF. He just has better physical traits. But it doesn't seem like right now there's a big rotation on the right side of the offensive line. It seems like they feel pretty comfortable with what they're doing. Doesn't mean it's going to be great.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. It may take time to gel, but like I said, the more that NPF misses, the more that he falls behind. Now, if there's a guy like you, and I kind of agree with you, there's a there's a part of it where when you have the pedigree, when you come from a big program, when you're a highly coveted recruit, when you've kind of been through it your rookie year and you kind of know what to expect and played NFL games, you may be able to overtake Ojukwu a little bit easier.
Faster,
then faster. But NPF is just, it's a new system. He struggled. How much shape is he in? How much can he actually apply and quickly apply? And how much are they willing to kind of fuck around with that right tackle spot and put people in and out and switch around and all this kind of stuff? So I have a hard time coming away with a lot of confidence that NPF is the starter. And I don't know if I'm comfortable enough quite yet to say that I even project NPF to be the starter by week 1. It will be very interesting. It's like a lot of people on this team, I'm gonna have to see it to believe it, and we're gonna have to see some practice to see that he is on the right track. And right now, it does not sound like it's a for sure thing, and people need to grips with it that it's not a for sure thing.
It's one thing after another so far. So you got to stop that trend. You got to just be there, be available, and practice. Okay, let's get to Tracy Rocker, defensive line coach. This was after practice today, of course, as the position coaches were available. This is from Jim Wyatt, correct? Obviously, you guys.
So there's one from Jim Wyatt, and then I'm going to play one from JT as well right after it.
You can say his last name,
because they all tie together. So
can you say JT's last name on the show and give him proper credit, please?
Yeah, JT Runk or Runke or whatever he pronounces it, but he'll get it's on the video.
I know. I just wanted you to say
it's open to interpretation. It's the worst last name ever, and I've already told him that to his face.
I know. I wanted you to say it out loud because I have no desire to try to say it out loud. So
Runke,
this is from
Runke.
JT of the Hot Read Pod, and of course Jim Wyatt. This was Tracy Rocker, Titans defensive line coach, talking about T'Vondre Sweat.
Hey, every day it keeps improving and getting better. The biggest thing is just having a good attitude, being a great teammate. That's been a plus, and no doubt the conditioning. The thing about football, you can train as much as you want. No, you can never be in football shape, we call it, and that's pushing and pulling. And the deal is, he's back running, he's doing a good job. My deal is how you approach practice every day. He's positive, and so that's been my enjoyment. It's been a great attitude, working hard, and Jeff has really, helped him along. And some of the older guys.
How was he when he showed up back here for camp, and have you seen kind of improvement from him in a couple of days?
No, I think that the first 2 days he was all over the place. Not defensively of knowledge of the defense. It's the body, because he was out and couldn't, and you're trying to tie your lower half in with your upper half, so it's getting the coordination back. And now, when we went to the stadium, you're like, okay. Here we go. We got everything's working all simultaneously, so that was a plus there. It's been doing really well, keep improving. I think the most important deal is us just keep working him into shape. He wants to be in shape, so it's not us working him or pushing him. He wants to do it, so that's the positive deal about it. He wants to do it, and so it's been a positive deal there. But the biggest thing is, like I told everyone, he's had a great attitude. And Jeff has also been a big help. Holborn has been a big help, and just showing him how to be a pro. And but the guy, he wants to do really well, and so it's easy. And I just think it's going to take every day to keep getting better. It's easy to say. It's easy to say what you want. It's the work that you put in and put forth, and one to reach those goals and personal individual goals. You got to have all the other players come with you, and that's going to be the goal. I mean, for him to reach his goals, he's got to help Sweat. He's got to help Landry. He's got to help Arden. And now, once all of us come together, I think now he will achieve those goals he wants.
So special thanks.
Those goals were Defensive Rookie of the Year, by the way.
Yes. Special thanks to JT Runke and Jim Wyatt there. Real quickly, if T'Vondre Sweat plays the whole season, that'll still be 6 more games than Danico Autry will have played for his defensive line.
That's
so
true.
He
found Brian Cushing's stash.
Yeah, all right. Stealing Herndon's jokes. By the way, funny story as a recruit. You know me, like my recruiting stuff. Brian Cushing is one of the few humans that when I was working at Rivals.com in like 2005, that I heard stories about him as a high school prospect. People were like, this guy's fucking crazy. He's on the juice. He was from New Jersey, went to USC, like big time 5-star recruit. And people were just like, this guy's been juicing since like 5th grade. Like people knew about Brian Cushing for a long time is my point. All right. T'Vondre Sweat, I think the most important takeaway here through all of this is like the Titans aren't super worried about what's going on. They're happy with the direction things are going, that it's fairly standard, and that the most important thing is how T'Vondre Sweat is approaching all of this. And it sounds like they are very pleased with how he is approaching all of this, Zach.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff from this because, you had your video taken a little bit out of context and people, have to find a negative light. We talked about on Thursday's show. And he's talking about, I'm just coaching. I've been very happy with the shape he's shown up, his attitude, his work ethic, all this stuff. And he goes on to say that, it's a lot of different. And this is a guy who, T'Vondre Sweat, who there's not a practice where someone doesn't say, and this includes Saturday's open camp, Well, he took on a double team, and then he was still pushing the pocket back. Like that's what he did at Texas. And he did that 390 something pounds. Now he's doing it here at 365 pounds. It's also important to note that Pete Prisco, who was there on the ground last week, has come to find out their plan is to get him under 360 this year, which is something that ties into what Tracy Rocker said at the end of the Jim White clip, where he's talking about basically he wants to be in shape. And this then ties back into what I told everybody on Thursday, that it's kind of like Will Levis. It's not going to be, his success is not going to be for lack of trying, because he's motivated by money. And the Tennessee Titans have told him he makes the most money at a certain weight. He's got to get to that weight. So all this stuff ties together.
Yeah.
And also stacking up good practices and learning from the bad ones, or the ones not necessarily bad ones, but learning from the ones where he made the mistakes. And as Tracy Rocker said, he walks into the stadium on Saturday and everything just clicked. His lower body's talking to his upper body the way we want him to, the way we've coached him to. And that's something he's not coached likely at Texas, because he talks about how he's talked about that before. There's someone that's been able to kind of get away with his physical talent more so than his technique, and now he's learning the technique, and he's losing the weight, and he's getting in shape. And you can tell if you're listening on a podcast by my voice, but you can also tell if you're looking at me on YouTube right now, it should make you fucking excited. Like, if this is a guy that's putting it all together, and you're hearing all the right things, and all the right things are not just word fluff, it is actually being put into practice every week. And his goal is to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. And, Tracy Rocker kind of downplays that and says that,
It's okay.
It's a team effort to get to that, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, if that's his goal, he's working hard as hell to reach that goal. And that should make you excited as a Titans fan. Yeah. Work ethic does not seem to be the issue with T'Vondre Sweat right now.
Yeah. First of all, normally it's the top half that is talking to the lower half. Normally it's like, hey, come on, big guy. Don't let me down. Don't let me down, bottom half. Like, normally that's what it is. I think what's interesting is, like, it's hard to argue with Sweat success or failure based on talent if the motivation is there. It's hard to make the case that he will not be a good player. Like, so you know how I always am, right? Like, hey, well, we got to see it to what you just said. Hey, I got to see it to believe it. When the pads come on and the lights come on and the games are happening is when it matters. We can say all we want to about a player's motivation or work ethic off the field or X, Y, or Z or whatever. And like, hey, he looks great, or he's more vocal, or there's a million things we can do to analyze players and coaches. But what matters is, do you produce on Sundays? And we can sit here and say, and I normally caveat a lot of my opinions with, look, he can be in shape and he can do everything right, and it still might not work out for him because he just might not be that great. I find it hard to make that case for this particular player. Like, if the work ethic is there, and if the motivation is there, and if he is at the weight in which the Titans think is going to maximize his ability, and he puts the work in to be there in that place physically, it just feels really hard to make the case that will not lead to success. And so, like, again, there's a lot of different players we talk about all the time. Like, hey, so-and-so does this well, and so-and-so's doing this well. Doesn't mean it's going to translate, but we like what's happening. It's hard to make that case for Sweat if he is at the right weight and working hard and motivated to be where he's supposed to be. It's just, the guy's so stinking strong and powerful, and the tape don't lie from Texas, So
and the attitude and mindset is there, according to Tracy Rocker. The mindset's there, and that's, I think, one of the things that people that want to be negative about T'Vondre Sweat have kind of latched onto, is that he's lazy. Well, that's not necessarily the narrative coming out of Texas his last year, for sure. In his second to last year, they saw improvement. And that comes from Mike, who follows Texas, obviously, UT Junior very closely. So
TU?
I don't know. I look at it. What?
Maybe we call them TU from now on, or maybe we just come up with a new acronym.
Isn't that Tulsa? I mean,
it is.
They're UT Junior.
All right.
So, but I look at it and I go, this is what I kept trying to tell people, and I don't know if I'm going to be proven right, but so far I really have no doubt. It's hard for me to find doubt in Tavondre Sweat, barring an injury. Like, I mean, that's where I'm kind of with you. It's like, if all this stuff is trending in the right direction, which we have no reason to believe that it's not trending in the right direction based off everything that we've heard from the head coach to the player to the defensive line coach to the defensive coordinator, there's no reason not to believe that it's trending in the right direction. Then there's no way he's not going to be good. Like, I'm kind of with you. Maybe it's not like Levis, in the sense that there is a lot of variables that make Levis, even if he puts in the work ethic,
it's way more it's way more complicated.
Way more complicated. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to stop the Tavondre Sweat train. And he said it himself, if I get down to 345, I'm a Hall of Fame player. So
there you go. I mean, again, the biggest question is going to be availability, health, maintenance, whatever. And if he answers that question definitively, then the whole point of drafting him is that there's not a lot of questions after that. Like there's just not. All right. So let me quickly say thanks to our sponsor, Sinkers Beverages, of course, Kingston Group, 2 great products here in town, run and operated here locally in Nashville by Nashvillians for Nashvillians. So make sure you support good local business. Keep those dollars in the community. It goes much further, and that dollar gets recreated and replicated and moved around the community, which is good for jobs. It's good for people, and it's good for you. So make sure you support Sinkers Beverages, the Kingston Group Bluegrass Beverages as well. They've got a great wine selection, incredible bourbon selection, and if you join the in crowd, of course, you get access to a lot of those allocations and some of those specialty bourbons that they will distribute only to you as a member of the in-crowd. So make sure you sign up there for that. You'll get updates and stuff. Follow them on the socials as well. Kingston Group, buildkg.com. You got stackintheinbox.com, football and other F words. And, of course, you can check out our brand new Preds subscription community, Lower Broad Hockey, over there on Substack. If you're signing up for Stack in the Inbox, sign up for Lower Broad Hockey. And one last note here, you can get on the socials and on all the show notes. We've got some questions we want you, the listeners, to answer so we can better understand you guys, your using habits, what subjects you like, what topics you like, where do you want us to meet you guys and engage with you guys, all kinds of stuff so we can better learn you guys and better serve you better content. So make sure you take a few minutes, less than 5 minutes, and answer a few questions for us. We would really, really appreciate that. The link is in the show notes, YouTube, podcast, and on all the social feeds as well. Do you have any more videos, or do you want to get to the quarterbacks here, or do you want to go with Otten?
Well, I mean, we got stuff from Otten and Jaquan Jackson. Maybe we can save that or go listen to the Hot Read podcast, and maybe they'll play it over there. So there you go.
They would appreciate that. I know that. So if you'd like to listen to Otten, go there. So first of all, do you have any thoughts on Danico Autry's 6-game suspension? That's kind of the big news with the former
Titans
Titan
don't
player.
play the Texans in the first 6 weeks, and
they do not.
And he's not a Tennessee Titan. So there's my full thoughts on that.
But in a division where a drive could be the difference between one finishing first in the division.
They only have like 5 other players that are just as good as Danico.
No, I know. Look, NFL game of attrition. People get hurt. Teams get worse. That's whoever's not doing that is the best, and so we'll see. Maybe it just means Danico Autry is extra fresh for the last 12 weeks of the season. So, all right, Tua signs a contract, 4 years, $212 million, 167 guaranteed, 53.1 on average. That's number 3 all time, or number 3 in the league right now. Jordan Love, 4 years, $220, $75 million. Of course, signing bonus, $155 million guaranteed. 55 makes he's tied for first place with Burrow. By the way, I used your stuff on Big ESPN Radio this weekend because I was like, if you look at historical data, basically one, maybe number 2, a second quarterback in a class, maybe will get the second contract. And, of course, the 5 quarterbacks in the 2020 draft class have now signed extensions for $1.225 billion, which is Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Love, and Hurts. It's the anomaly. It is the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, that definitely is the big exception. It is. Holy crap.
So here's what's interesting to me, and this is honestly, we've had these debates around football forever. Can you win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco? Can you win a Super Bowl with Ryan Tannehill? It's the same debate and discussion we have around quarterbacks for a lot of teams in a lot of markets. And one of the things that Brian Callahan said very early in our studying of his sort of philosophy, let's say, on football, is there's only like a handful of guys in his mind over the years that have been the system, right? Everybody's a system quarterback, unless you are Peyton Manning, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, a very elite tier of top flight, like just special humans that just aren't born very often, right? They're just not many of them. Like there was Elway, there was Peyton Manning, there's like Aaron Rodgers. There's just a handful of guys that can be the system. Otherwise, even some of the best names that are the most highly paid, Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, pick the guys that are on the list, Jared Goff, pick the guys that are on the top 10 highest paid list. Almost all those guys are system quarterbacks to some degree. Will Levis is probably going to fall into that group. And what he said, that has stuck with me for a long time. We also know, here's a factoid for you. How much do you think Dan Marino made in his entire career? This is master of the obvious stuff, but I just want to put some numbers on it. Dan Marino, ahead of his time, Hall of Famer,
million?
$57 million total. Dan
That's
Marino.
it?
That's how much he took home.
Wow, I almost said 100 million, but I was like, man, that's way too low.
For being an unprecedentedly great, historically game-changing, league-altering player, setting records 20 years ahead of his time, 57 total million. You know how much money Carson Wentz has made in his career?
Well, yeah, I don't know, but I know it's a lot more than that because I mean that was one of his contracts was that
$129 million he made. So I say that to put into context timing, right? And the timing is the cost of doing business. So I've got all these different debates hitting me in the head. Like, can you win a Super Bowl? Is Joe Flacco elite? Through the can you win the championship with Ryan Tannehill? To is Jalen Hurts a system quarterback? To Brian Callahan telling us that really there's only 3 to 5 guys who don't need a good system or a good team or a good coaching staff to win a Super Bowl. To the cost of now doing business in the NFL, which is a $40 to $60 million a year quarterback. That's just the cost of doing business. Jordan Love has played 8 or 9 good football games in his life. and just is now the highest paid human at that position. Tua has major injury questions and was about to retire recently and is getting that kind of money. Jared Goff was traded away from a team after taking them to the Super Bowl. Trevor Lawrence, we've well documented the questions about Trevor Lawrence's potential and upside. I mean, we can keep going with these guys. And what it brings me back to is Will Levis. And I think what's interesting about Jordan Love is that he's only had really the 8 or 9 or 10 good football games. So one season starting. CJ Stroud, 1 full season in the NFL. And the Packers, although it's a little different because the Packers had 3 years of knowledge of the player, right? Like being around him, seeing his work ethic, seeing how he interacts with athletes, seeing how he interacts with players. Will Levis has had a full year of that, even when he was backing up Ryan Tannehill. Granted, different regime. Brian Callahan hasn't seen that yet, so that's important. But it goes right to our conversation about, can Will Levis be in that top 20% in the NFL? When do you think about paying him, and can you learn this year if he is the guy? The Packers think they have, so much so that they paid the highest yearly salary in the history of the league, on paper at least. I don't have a take about Will Levis other than if you think you even have an inkling of knowledge that this is going to be the guy that you sort of have to go to battle with for the next 5 years or maybe even 8 years, don't you want to try to pay him as soon as possible? And I don't know if that's at the end of this year, maybe the end of next year, but it feels
you can't pay him after this year.
Okay, so you have to wait till after the third year to do the extension.
The third year, if I'm not mistaken.
Just a dumb question here, maybe. Can you put in place the extension that takes effect after the third year, or do you have to wait until after the actual team year to negotiate?
You have to wait till the actual season has been completed. And I am fair because I see this was after. So Trevor Lawrence just signed his extension after his third year, so it's after 2025.
Okay,
for Will Levis.
So ultimately, almost all these guys, I feel like you could nitpick the varying degrees of quality. Like you might like just Justin Herbert's deep pass, and I might like Jordan Love's footwork, and you might like Tua's accuracy and quick release, and like we can debate all this shit. But at the end of the day, you have to pay a guy who's even in the middle. All these guys are in the middle, according to Brian Callahan. Like they're all in the middle, and they're all going to get these huge contracts, and none of them have really proven anything. So it brings me right back to like at the end of this season, we're going to know a lot of data about Will Levis, but I don't know what we're going to know and how much we're going to know it. And I'm not sure you're ever going to, I don't know. I find it really interesting.
Listen, you're going to know what he is. Now, then what the question is let's say that he's in the 60%, or you believe that he can win you a Super Bowl. How much does your wallet back up that line of thinking? Like, that's where, like, you know, they know what they have in Jordan Love. They, in their minds, they know what they have in Jordan Love. They know what they have in Jared Goff. They know what they have in Tua. That's better than the unknown, and they're willing to pay that much more than for the known than the unknown, whether or not they believe like they're elite quarterbacks. Again, there's a difference between being an elite quarterback and being a Super Bowl winning quarterback.
Yes, completely agree.
So it becomes for what the Dolphins, the Packers are telling you is that they believe they could win the Super Bowl with Tua and with Jordan Love. And they believe in those guys more than they believe in dipping back into the quarterback carousel. And I don't think it has anything to do with either of those coaches' job security. So sometimes, sometimes stuff like this is kind of tied to job security.
Well, look at Dak.
That's not the case. Yeah,
I mean,
that's
Dak's contract with Mike McCarthy is very much tied up in the future of the coaching staff.
Yeah. So, I look at it like Dak's kind of a good example for your Will Levis scenario in the sense that I don't think he does, but let's say that Dak hits free agency and let's say that Will Levis doesn't show enough. I think there's a possibility that you at least kick the tires on Dak Prescott. Not saying that the Titans should sign him or will sign him, but I think they would definitely do their due diligence. They'd be silly not to if they don't see a leap from Will Levis. And because you know what you're getting in Dak Prescott. And Dak Prescott is a quarterback that can win a Super Bowl.
Sure.
I mean, he's not an elite quarterback, but he is definitely a quarterback that can win the Super Bowl. And he should have probably already had a ring by now, I feel like. And that's through no fault of his own, in my opinion.
Or at least a playoff win.
a playoff win. And I think the later years are not his fault. And I kind of look at it in the sense that I still hold true that you should be able to figure out what Will Levis is. Then it becomes, what is Will Levis and how much do you value what Will Levis is after his third year compared to the unknown, compared to whoever is going to be the next great quarterbacks and all this kind of stuff. Because if, let's say, you see progress from Will Levis, but it nets you 6 wins, you're still not going to get rid of Will Levis. And you are operating under the assumption, okay, we saw enough from a leap of Will Levis. Other stuff didn't go in our favor, but we've seen enough from Will Levis. He's the guy. And then he declines in year 3, and you don't give him an extension, right?
Yeah.
But if he progresses, then he stays the same, but your wins increase. Then you're kind of like, okay, he stayed the same. The team got better, but he stayed the same. Is what we've seen from Will Levis is stagnant year 2 to year 3, progression. Is that enough to avoid dipping into the drafted waters?
And there's more, like, I feel like it's more, I'm better suited to create a prediction for what happens, having thought through this a little bit more over the weekend, listened to Brian Callahan for the last couple of weeks now and months. And it feels like if you told me who are the guys that are the system, I think there might be 3. It's Mahomes, Allen, and Burrow, and that might be it. It doesn't mean that the other guys aren't great. It doesn't mean Lamar Jackson's not great, or that Justin Herbert doesn't turn into something great with a good coaching staff now and with Jim Harbaugh. Like, it doesn't mean that C.J. Stroud might not be that guy coming up. He might be good enough to be the system coming up. I think you have to draw a really exclusive line around that top tier. In which case, everyone else is kind of in the same place. And could Will Levis be in that place? I think there's a pretty good chance he is. And if you look at how this, like, to your point about, well, only 1 or 2 guys from each draft class, get these second deals. I mean, Bryce Young doesn't look like Carolina's doing enough around him to great success. Anthony Richardson still has a play style question and health question, and that he needs to figure out and has to evolve and adapt. And that doesn't sound like the coaching staff and the ownership want him to evolve and adapt much. the Titans are doing the most of these teams in that draft class 2023 to put enough things around their player to give him the best chance to succeed. Yeah, Andrew says Aaron Rodgers is still the system. I might agree with that maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I might need to see it now, but probably. I'm okay with putting Rodgers on that platform as well. His age might have a factor there. But if you look at receiving core and coaching staff and offensive line investment and running backs, like no one's done more to help their player in the division or in that draft class than the Titans have with Will Levis. So I feel like Will Levis, we're going to know kind of like, it's weird. I don't think we're going to know if he's good enough to win a championship, but I think that's related more to the rest of the team because you mentioned Dak going to free agency. I see it being more like a Jared Goff, Matt Stafford type of move. If I'm him, if I'm leaving the Cowboys where I've always loved and want to be the quarterback, I'm going to a team that can win a Super Bowl today. Like, is that the Niners? You trade Purdy for Dak, like a Jared Goff for Stafford kind of thing. I don't know. And I don't think the Titans would be in that situation. But I'm more comfortable. No, I feel more comfortable predicting what's going to happen with Levis, which is that he's going to be a pretty good middle of the pack quarterback who's capable of winning if the team around him is good enough. He's got enough talent and enough leadership to be a pretty good quarterback, in which case he's going to get paid $60 million a year.
Right.
And it's just where we are now. Like, it's just where we are in the business. And all these teams are looking at their guy going, let's see if we can build a winner around him. And that is like, that's where the Titans are at right now. And hopefully that involves Denard Wilson. Hopefully that involves, Brian and Bill Callahan for a long time. It just feels like we're in a weird it feels like the whole quarterback thing crystallized with these two contracts because Jordan Love is completely unproven.
Maybe by the time that Levis and because Stroud and Levis and Richardson and Bryce Young will all be up for extensions at the same time. What will be interesting is what does the quarterback market do with Dak Prescott and a few of these others in between? Then does it start to level out because it kind of made a big jump? And then now you've kind of see it kind of level out. Like Tua's third. He's not first. Jordan Love is right there with, Joe Burrow. And then this and that. Like, where does it go? Does it just keep?
I think Brock
stay right there.
I think Brock Purdy is the name to watch in that conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think Brock Purdy is a product of the environment around him. I really like the player. I think he's good. Again, some of the argument here is that I'm making is that every one of these guys is a system quarterback. Every one of these guys needs to have a good supporting cast and a good O-line and a good deal, all this stuff. And yes, Steve says you're describing Tannehill. I completely agree. Tannehill, the Titans were the victim of it. Not victim, but like Tannehill was good enough to be a winning quarterback, and so they had to pay him $35 million at the time. That was the going rate, and that's how he had to get paid. That's what happens. And so I think Purdy is
his contract ended up aging well, technically, until it got to the point where there was a lot of restructures.
Here's what I would say. I think Purdy is the one to watch because Dak, you could argue, is worth the $60 million. I don't know if Purdy is worth the 60 or 65. If that could be the next number coming up. And Purdy is the guy that could reset the market. And I think he's worth way more to the Niners and that system than he's going to be worth to somebody else. Doesn't mean he's not good. Doesn't mean he's not a starter. But I just think that Purdy is the guy that I think could throw the market off or bring it back down to earth. That's where I think because Stroud's going to get a huge contract. You know what I mean? Like you can already see Stroud in 3 years. So I think Purdy's the one that is the one to keep an eye on for my perspective, at least. But I don't know. It's fascinating to see these numbers and just be like, no, 5 guys in one draft class are now making $1.2 billion. And you know what their playoff record is? Like Burrow's won a couple of games in the playoffs. But like, I think Jordan Love has 1 playoff win. Jalen Hurts got to a Super Bowl. Tua hasn't done much. Herbert hasn't done like it's just not a lot there for $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
It's the cost of doing business, man. And so just be prepared for Will Levis to be considered the 12th best quarterback in the NFL and to get $50 million a year. Like, just be prepared for that is what I feel like I'm preparing myself for. So, and that might be good enough to win like 3 Super Bowls if you put enough stuff around him, right? So,
right.
We are in the Jordan era. This is the Jordan era. Like, you got to beat Jordan, and if you're not Jordan, everyone else is just busting their ass to try to get over the Jordan hump, and that's just where we're at right now. So, okay. All right. Sinkers Beverages, the Kingston Group. We'll have a lot of reaction on Thursday with all the stuff that took place from padded practices this week. Should be a lot of fun. Again, check out stackingtheinbox.com, football and other F words, Hot Read podcast, Paul Karski podcast, all the other great shows across the 440 Sports Network. Zach, always a pleasure, my friend. Good to see you. Good to talk to you. All you in the comments, appreciate you guys. Thumbs up on YouTube. Share, of course, on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're watching us, podcast feed. We do appreciate you guys. And obviously, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. Otherwise, have a great week. We'll talk to you guys on Thursday.